Good day and hello everyone. Well, good afternoon and good evening. I know there are a lot of people who've joined from overseas, and appreciate you all joining uh, today. In continuation of the CFFLive program in support of the Society of Mentors that I've put together to for us to bring support to the cybersecurity community and the larger CFF community. We are joined by our newly minted master mentor, Bryan Hurd. And Bryan is a longtime friend of CFF, but I have to still look up his resume because it just keeps on adding at an incredible pace. So Bryan is currently the VP of Aon Cyber Security Solutions, which we probably are more familiarly known as the Stroz Friedberg, their business unit. He's a former the chief of intelligence for Microsoft's digital crime unit, and then again has a very hallowed career behind him. This I'll request Bryan to join the call, and let's discuss about your many accomplishments, but of course the topic of hand. It's always good to see you, Bryan. Morning, and hopefully you are navigating through this pandemic crisis, making more friends and also sharing more along with your professional responsibilities. So over to you to give us a walkthrough of your experiences. Talk about the concrete things that executives and the senior leaders should do, in order to respond to incidents, but also to prepare for them. Right? I mean, this is some situation that we got into now that nobody foresaw, but those that are prepared for crisis can weather them well and recover and revive. So the message is overall for this program and the overall Society of Mentors is how can we prepare for that? How can we recover and revive? So over to you, Bryan. Let's get started.
Well, thank you, Val, and thank you to the members of the CFF for continuing, as Val said, great partnership. One, before I get into anything, I hope all are healthy and safe and weathering social distancing and the work from home environment that is new to a lot of us. It causes that very type of environment where fear, uncertainty, and doubt and separation have unfortunately given our adversaries even more advantage in social engineering. It's that urgency that they take advantage of. But before getting into that, as Val had mentioned, I have had a very fortunate career. So one of the things about being a mentor is Val told me, say, well, how did you get to where you are? And I wish I could tell you there's a formula. I wish I could tell you there was a plan when I started. There really wasn't, but it's worked out okay in terms of how things have gone. I graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and then was at Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, for those of you that watch the TV show. And as Val has pointed out to me, none of the people that he knows that are actual NCIS are as pretty or as thin as the ones on the TV show. And I agree with him completely. I basically was fortunate enough to be in the terrorism center and then looking at what didn't exist. The internet didn't exist yet, or the web didn't exist yet, but I was looking at the ARPANET and DARPANET as a potential counter-espionage and terrorism threat. And asked around in the Navy, who's in charge of this? And they said, who's in charge of what? And so what I will tell you, for those of you starting out your career, or even those of us still later in our career, picking the right opportunities and seeing something coming gives you an opportunity no matter where you are in your career arc. So one of the things I've always attuned to, and Val and myself and others, is lead from where you are. And that doesn't mean taking over. It means highlighting the right ideas and creatively working with your teams. So the rest of this stuff is, in terms of career path, I was very fortunate to be uniformed military, government civilian, and even led the innovation for the U.S. watch listing system, what many of you know is the no-fly list, as one of the smaller lists. And then was recruited to be Microsoft's first chief of cybercrime intelligence. And now I'm over at Stroz Friedberg. Many of you may not know the company by name, but you know our work. And the only reason I can cite the following is because public releases were approved by the companies involved. And including Cambridge Analytica, Facebook hired Stroz Friedberg to investigate not only Cambridge Analytica itself, but many of the other apps that they were concerned about that were abusing their data. Mark Zuckerberg used us to diagnose the fake document of his college roommate claiming half the company. Stroz Friedberg was also involved in almost every logoed breach you've ever seen, just quietly behind the scenes, usually under the attorneys. And I provide that information to give the context for the following. We are seeing a huge uptick in ransomware attacks on companies of all sizes. If an executive tells you we're too small to be targeted, you're going to be targeted because you're small. They know Bank of America is not going to get or any of the banks, not to pick on that one in particular, but that they have endpoint protection, that they have a SOC 24/7, follow the sun. Those kind of things are the type of attacks that large companies are normally expecting, and small to medium-sized companies are not or don't have the type of security force to withstand them. So we're seeing a lot of different ransomwares. We're also seeing an increase in maze ransomware and other attacks, and other adversaries are now exfiltrating data before the encryption attack. And one of the things about that is that it gives them that extra ability to extort the clients, even if they can recover from backups. So even if you have all your backups in place and you say, look, the ransomware is something we can get around without paying the ransom, then they will take their ill-gotten gains that they've exfiltrated and extort you anyway. In fact, in some cases, the ransomware was merely the adversaries saying hello. They really didn't care if they got all the backups and everything, because they had data to extort the client with. For those of you that would enjoy working in that field, I can tell you it's very exciting. And I compare it often to being what we call a cyber smoke jumper. You're looking out over the forest, you see smoke, and somebody puts you in a plane with a parachute on, and you jump in to help whoever's in that area and wherever the fire is. I'll also tell you that call comes in every Friday at 5 p.m. because I don't know why it comes in every Friday at 5 p.m., but we call them Stroz Fridays. It's Friday at 5 p.m. And I don't care what time zone you're in, it's going to be 5 p.m. on your Friday, or 7 a.m. on Sunday on a 3-day weekend. So if that's the kind of lifestyle you want, hey, give Val a call. We could talk about, how those things happen and how you want to destroy your free time and jump into fires. For those of you on the executive side, one of the things that Val, myself, and the members of the CFF have supported, and what is a call to action for me personally, and I'd like to share it with each of you, is in the cybersecurity community, we've done a little bit of disservice to the fellow executives because we keep considering that when we're talking to the board, we're dumbing it down or having to explain how a firewall works to a group of people who honestly and genuinely don't care how a firewall works. But I will offer to you, it's not dumbing it down. It's us leveling it up. The CEO of Brinks does not understand how the engines in the trucks work, nor does he desire to tune one. The CFO of any major Fortune 500 company, to my knowledge, having been in thousands of board meetings, has never been briefed on which technology produced the financial report. They've never asked what kind of database it is, they've never asked what brand it is, and they've never asked how the tables are aligned. They've asked if the data is valid. And I think as security professionals, one of the things about leading either in times of peace or times of concern is that we need to speak in enterprise business terms. And it is not an easy thing to do. It sounds easy, it feels easy, it looks easy, until you actually stand in front of a board and try and bring them on that journey of talking about the preparedness you're looking to fund, or the response you're looking to lead, or the liability that is now ensued by the loss or compromise of accounts or data. These are the types of things that the technology doesn't matter. And that's a strong phrase in our world. The technology doesn't matter, the impact does. The impact on the business, the impact on your customers and employees, the impact on trust. Now, a lot of that impact turns into litigation and financial impact, and a lot of things you can measure quite easily in computers. However, that call to action, level it up. Be thinking about that as you walk into the room. And if you find yourself explaining to a board of directors or a CEO and a COO the difference between two firewalls, you may have lost the thread of the room. And it's, I still do it once in a while. It's not an easy thing. The other trends we're seeing is a lot of people aren't prepared. And when Val and I were talking about this, is the things that your company or your clients may be delaying during this time are the very things they should be pulling forward. Tabletop of your response plan, now that nobody can get into a conference room. And assume in your response plan a couple of the following interesting things. One, you will have no email. Your corporate email, if you're responding to ransomware, will be encrypted. You will need an alternate way to speak to people you only know in corporate email. And you'll need to have it set up before the ransomware hits. Two, your ransomware playbook. If you have one, great. If you don't, hey, first thing is to make a playbook. Second thing is to print it out, as dumb as that sounds. I've had clients that paid to have a ransomware. We developed a great ransomware playbook for them. We recommended print it out. They didn't. Ransomware hit. They not only didn't have the playbook, they had problems finding the phone numbers of their outside counsel, myself, and the other responders to alert us that we needed to get on a plane and jump into a forest fire. These kind of things seem like a worthless fire drill from grade school. It is anything but, especially now, especially with the challenges we're all facing. You need to refresh and dust off those response plans. You need to take the time out of a day that's already too busy and already too many Zoom meetings and WebEx meetings and Ring Central and all the other brands, just so I'm being polite, and take time to practice those and get those plans in place and ask questions and talk about them. Val, over to you for stage direction, sir.
Oh, stage directions there is, and you have set up the multiple theaters within that stage, so it's very difficult now to point to one. But I'll tell you, being a practitioner myself, this is something that I live and breathe in many different theaters, right? So one of the things that I wanted to get your thoughts on. What are the most critical things during these first moments? Because I believe, when you're dropped into the forest fire, right? I mean, you're going to be looking for the mask, and then you'll be looking for how it's going to be the fire hydrant and all that stuff. So the first few hours of an enterprise cyber incident is very critical, right? So where do you lead when you're thrown in? What do you look for, and what should they have in place?
So what's interesting for companies big and small, the first couple hours are usually about the legal paperwork. And it's one of the things you can do, no matter whether you need it or not, is get an incident response retainer in place. Have all of the contracts negotiated for which fire department is going to respond to your fire. Some people want you to pay in advance. Other people, us and others, have $0 retainers. If you have no money or time, still put a $0 retainer in place. Because you will spend time you want to be fighting a fire, negotiating with your general counsel to an outside counsel to a response company about how water gets to your fire. And that is a precious 6, 12, or 24 or more hours that you don't have, depending on what's going on in your company. Once you get those, it's understanding the first couple things. To use the analogy to continue, the cyber fireman you ask for is, what logs do you have? Where do we plug in to get the local fire plugins for the water, the logs, the insights, the abilities to get accounts, the abilities to provision VPNs, especially now, as most of this will be done remotely. So those kind of questions, definitely have those in advance in your response plan. Know where the logs are, know what the tuning of the logs are. A lot of times we find out, even if the adversary hasn't found and deleted them, the client never turned them on or doesn't retain them for more than 3 days or a week. If you're able to detect all of your breaches in 3 days or a week, great, that's a wonderful log retention strategy. If an adversary's been inside your organization for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of fiscal quarters, all of these I've seen this month, that's not a particularly good time frame for forensic evidence measured in minutes when you need it measured in weeks. The other thing you should have is your CEO and CFO ready to sign a $100,000 to $250,000 response project off and be able to put that money into the retainer when it's needed and when the fire is ongoing. Having them understand the approval process, because you're going to have to approve that kind of money up front, or at least within the first couple of days. It may be smaller. I've worked breaches as small as 2 hours, helping one client who was suspected of a breach, and we diagnosed in 2 hours it wasn't. I've worked other ones with a team of 30, taking 4 months. So from a bread box to a container ship, you don't know what kind of crisis when you put the parachute on. But those are the first couple of things in the first hours. And the other thing I'll tell you for those executives on the call, and I invited some of my friends who are CEOs and general counsels, asking for updates every 1 to 3 hours of a fire team and your own team will expend more energy giving you updates when they should be fighting the fire. You have to manage executive expectations that updates will come every 12 hours, every 24 hours, and that anything more frequent, except in the most extreme and exceptional of circumstances, will probably slow the response down. There's a bunch of other things, but I'll hand it back to Val to not have me take too much of the mic time and make sure we leave time for questions and answers of the audience.
Well, this is your mic time, so don't feel bad about that. We are here all to learn from those experiences. So going back to the experience, right? Overall, and I mean not just with all, you have had a history to be equipped to do this, right? Worked in national crisis operations for over 25 years, leading case management, U.S. watch listing, the Boston Marathon attack itself, and some of the biggest breaches. What methods of crisis leadership do you leverage when running this massive breach response cases? Because I think this is as much of a preparation as you can do. We talked about like dropping on the fire zone, but also the massive preparation leadership needs to do in organization, like crisis management. So what's your take on that?
I think one of the things for managing a crisis is urgency doesn't equal emotion. You can be urgent about something without yelling or screaming or things like that. As Val mentioned, I've worked in the terrorism arena, and again, around amazing teams of just heroes. And one of these was the Boston Marathon attack. I was the chief of identities for the entire U.S. watch listing system at the time, and had designed a case management system to go into the overall watch listing system. It took me 2 years to design. And on that day, they said, "Is it ready to brief the president from?" And I said, "Yeah, it is." And they're like, "Are you sure?" And that's not a slight question, don't get me wrong. But I was like, yeah, calmly, we had tested it on many things. And what it did was allowed many things to happen. I'll save that story for a different time. But nobody had asked for it. Nobody had wanted it. And the minute we needed it, they were glad that they had not resisted it too much over the preceding 2 years. So having those things in place, you will not be given love and appreciation for trying to put all these things in place. They'll tell you it's not needed. They'll tell you, we'll handle it when it comes. No, they won't. And you have to take a little bit of that in a very creative way with your board and with your team and with your priorities and with your budget. And you have to have the foresight to put those things in place for crisis management before the crisis. The other thing that's so critical, know the difference between important and urgent. There'll be a lot of urgent things and asks and people worried. The CEO wants this, the board wants to know this. Oh my God, we need to know that. Oh, this needs to happen. Yes, all of those things probably do need to happen, but not all of them are important during the first couple of hours of the crisis or at various times during it. And it really does take experience in crisis after crisis to understand the difference between important and urgent, or something that's presented as urgent, just so I differentiate truly urgent from, presented as urgent. The other thing, again, like I mentioned, set expectations about updates to senior leadership. Put a schedule in place and hit it. And if you find that schedule, and when you do those updates, Don't bring the entire team. 1 to 2 people update the board. Do not let them talk to the guy configuring the firewalls. Nothing good will come from that either way. Back to the level it up, and don't tell somebody how an engine is tuned. Just bring the right people who can speak the right level of update for crisis management to that board. And any questions, if you can answer it in the room, great. If not, say, we'll get you an answer in X period of time. Don't then go back and upend your team trying to answer board questions in the first 15 minutes after a board meeting. Set an expectation in a reasonable way that when those answers are possible, a board update will be provided. Trust me on this, you will spend a lot of time tuning this during your life managing crises. Also, the final thing, identify at the very start specific concrete work streams that break a very complex and confusing and emotional issue down into 1 to 5 to 10 concrete long-term work streams. Find and evict the adversary, determine what information was exfiltrated, make sure that the recovery is going well, have the lawyers ready to review PII. Each of these needs to be a distinct work stream because you will lose track of tasks no matter how good you are. Over to you, sir.
Sure. No, Bryan, that's great advice. And I think, to continue the thought of your initial opening was around how to get into this field and also how to prepare. The next one was around making sure the organization prepares. And the third one you talked about, the crisis management. I would want to pivot a little bit about those that are in action, the executives that do have to assess the organization, focus on avoiding the issues versus non-issues, the important versus urgent. And I can't fail to mention about our last week's conversation with Paul Rentz, and he mentioned about ants and elephants. There are some ants that and there are elephants that have to.
Sorry, everyone. I really love his analogy about ants and elephants. Go for it.
So I believe, what can executives do to assess their organizations in advance and during the course of action?
Well, and one of the things around this is this is a time for moving technical testing to the forefront and planning to the forefront, especially because your entire architecture is likely changed and adjusted for what you're doing. It is one of the things that we struggle with when you make emergency changes to an architecture. You need to make sure, one, that you then reassess the security of that changed architecture. Additionally, when the crisis is over, you need to turn those temporary things off or harden them for the life of the republic if you're going to keep that as part of your approach to cybersecurity. So I think overall, especially with what you've done to respond, and probably very well for each of you, and thank you for keeping our system working and our people safe, is take a second look at those configurations. Take a second look at multi-factor authentication. But if you're a board member, and for those of you talking that are on this call that are shooting me questions on the side or shooting them to Val, please continue, it's all about enterprise risk management. It's not about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a part of an overall tapestry, and honestly, even for those of us in it, not the leading elephant for an elephant chain analogy as opposed to the elephants and ants analogy. We're not the first elephant in the row. So yeah, you're going to be looking at the back end of another elephant, and that's the role we play. Anybody thinks the CISO is the CEO probably doesn't understand what a CISO is either. Leadership by the board starts with an enterprise risk registry that includes all of the primary concerns and secondary concerns of the board. Again, don't make it an academic exercise. Take the top 20 and see what you can do about those. Or take the top 5 and see what you can do about those. Don't, and former Navy, don't boil the ocean. Just take a couple things. If you can knock 10 to 15% of your risk problem off a year, you have a pretty good organization. And especially for low-hanging fruit. Pick a standard. Pick a framework for those of you, again, on the executive side. Have your teams, your legal and risk teams, not always your cyber teams, evaluate those enterprise standards or regulatory environments that you operate in, that your data exists in, and pick frameworks like the NIST standard, like HIPAA, like PCI and other things, and apply them where needed. Look at GDPR and CCPA, and they're remarkably plagiarized from each other, as will many of the follow-on requirements. So then what you're going to have to do is a crosswalk of standards, pick the minimum things you want to do in certain areas, and then dress up a little bit more in areas that have that particular issue, that particular data. But aligning those will stop you, and I've had this support issue with several clients. Every time a new standard comes out, they go back through this whole process, as opposed to aligning them across a crosswalk of standards, and then just tuning and responding to this most recent one, which doesn't cause them a whole review of the entire enterprise. And then implement and follow through, and do not delay in assessments, testing, incident response plans and playbooks, and having the fire department knowing who to call, knowing they can respond, knowing, and in fact, one other final thing we do is a cyber smoke jumper onboarding with some of our larger clients, and even some of the small ones, where it's a paid endeavor of 20 to 30 hours where we send the IR team over to figure out where all the pipes and hoses are, where all the logs are, kind of do a walkthrough with their team and talk about what is your log retention in these areas, what are you doing? And it's actually a mini consultancy, but it's also familiarization. So when they walk into the building for the second time during the crisis, you don't have the problems of walking into a building for the first time during a crisis. And the efficiency between the two can be overcome by professionals, but there's still an inefficiency.
Right. But yeah, I think that's a great summary of what you should think through when you don't have to actually fight the fire, right? When you have the time. So, Bryan, you talked about your leadership journey to begin with and your career and all. What's your learning journey? I mean, this is an organization everybody has learned, lessons learned probably every day. What tools and resources do you usually, go to and to keep yourself informed as well as abreast of the new up and coming?
A very great question. And depending on the career arc that each of you are trying to have, there are many, many paths, but there are two basic differentiators. Do you want to be a senior technical forensic type, which means every new operating system, you love to tear it apart. Every new vulnerability, you're reading them, and you have a lab set up in your house with every computer. You've even started hacking on your own autonomous vehicle or your neighbors. I don't know, please don't, but probably. So those kind of things, if you're on that track, SANS and all the other standards, I would get those trainings, not necessarily always because you need that technical knowledge, but they structure the discussion in a way that will help you support your career arc or your clients in a way they expect somebody to respond. Also, I'll tell you, some of the smartest people in technology response and tearing things apart don't always have the investigative abilities or the ability to brief a board. I was just on an IR with a couple of companies that responded, and one person walked in the boardroom and says, the hackers have been in your system since 2016 because of this file. And, I speak with great authority. And we asked him a couple questions. He goes, we don't have time for that. And he waved us off. He was wrong. The hacker had not been in for 2 years. They've been in for 2.5 weeks. The file was a standard part of an operating system that they'd misdiagnosed. But the board and their outside counsel was about to inform 20 years of employees that their information had been compromised, and it had not. The liability from that back to that person's corporation would have been horrific, paying for all of those notifications, all the cleanup, all the PR. One of the things about being a senior cyber fireman, and Val and many on this call are, and Chris, I know you're out there, is being calm, is being collected. But that doesn't mean we're not focused on mission and we're not being urgent. It just means there's a time for bravado. There's a time to be emotive. And there's a time to just focus on the mission and update the board in a very, very regimented way. Because even at this point in my career, I learn on every breach some new nuance that my client needs me to address that I haven't seen before. And I've seen thousands of these, including running espionage and counter-espionage operations around the world. Still learn something new on every breach. And the final thing I'll say, and again, one or two of them are I can see in the questions and also hitting me on my laptop. My friends, I call friends like Val, I call friends like Chris, I call the CISOs of Fortune 50 companies, not to sell them our services, but to ask them questions about cases without discussing the client names, of course. And they call me. We help each other with those kind of questions. And that's the community and the reason that I'll end with that I am so proud to be associated with the CFF and so very proud to be supporting the mentorship program.
Well, Bryan, thank you so much. I believe we had some Q&As coming in for those who couldn't join as well. So one of the questions that I got to ask you, and hopefully that gentleman can tune in later to see, is you have dealt with so many of the cases and issues and incidents, right? What is something that's that strikes you back as a unique scenario or situation, especially in the cyber arena, that you think that well, I'm trying to figure out? It's a tough question, I know, because of the variety that you see. The one that got away, maybe.
No, actually, there's one that got away. I'll give you his name. And especially for those of you tuning in from Eastern Europe, tell Ikra, I-K-R-A, Russian for caviar, that I say hello. And I still have a bounty out on his head because he hurt one of my clients. I will give an engraved bottle of Johnny Walker Blue with your name on it, shipped anywhere on the planet, if you bring me the real world name of the hacker known as Ikra. Number 95 on HackerOne, and he's an extortionist. I want his name. I'm going to give it to the Secret Service, and as soon as they identify him, I will ship you your bottle. He's the one that got away. Other than that, most of the other cases I've worked it isn't quick. And that's one of the things about those of you in this field. I've worked espionage in some of the largest identity theft cases. It takes years to bring somebody to justice or to stop their espionage operations or to get burned through the criminal thing. However, the one that got away was Ikra. So bring me his name. We'll see what we can do.
All right. So I think we are at the tail end of our program. Bryan, thank you. Great to always speak with you, and now always hearing about your experiences, and as it accumulates, right, it becomes a great amount of body of knowledge. So thank you, Bryan, for being with us today. Hopefully everyone is doing well and will continue to. And as we navigate through this time, I've been relying on books. So this is probably a familiar book for a lot of people. I'm rereading this one. This is Team of Teams by General McChrystal. And the reason I bring up a book is I think that's one of the, you are standing on the shoulder of giants. That's how we learn. And some of the fascinating tales that are real and sometimes surreal are what you learn through books. Specifically, I think, Bryan, from what you mentioned about the coordination and the amount of collaboration that it takes to prepare and also to respond, that's just incredible amount of effort that needs to go in. So advanced preparation also needs us to not only be kind of adept with the technical knowledge, but also the crisis management part, the leadership part, collaboration, and that's why this book stands out. Probably next week I'll have another one. I'm trying to finish a week or reread one per week, but this is an incredible resource. Take a look if you can. As for the announcements, we have a great lineup. Actually, I'm now a little bit struggling, which is a great news, because I've got conflicting dates on Tuesday, my lunch hour. So this lunch hour is booked. I'm trying to get as much as time-wise within this slot. So Bryan is available in Pacific time, I believe. So it worked out great. For those joining from Europe, we will continue to have this, but we'd also open up a Thursday morning soon, if not in May, at least in June. Some of our friends have already called in to be part of the program. Not next week, but the following week, we'll have Maya Bunt, who's with Sisri as the head of digital. And subsequently, the week after, on 26th, we'll have Trolls voting. Next week, I have a conflict, as I said, like we'll have to resolve and see who's the one who's going to take on the first one. But next week, Tuesday, we'll be back at the same time, same channel. Now we are following as well. We'll just continue with that. Thank you for giving us your time and attention. You will have this video posted up on YouTube for those who have missed your friends. if you want to share them with you. Also, we'll post this on LinkedIn and the takeaways as well. Thank you again. Stay safe, be well, stay healthy, and stay connected, stay strong. Thank you, Bryan. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.